Hello, I'm Jesus Romero, and most of you who know me know of my background and my experience having worked for the U.S. government, combined military and civil service, time in service for a total of 37 years, including a year and a half working for U.S. defense contractors. I want to talk to you about El Tren de Aragua, the Venezuelan criminal organization that can trace its chain of command directly to the Maduro's regime, starting with Nicolás Maduro as the head of the Tren de Aragua. You might hear that it's other people, but the truth of the matter is that El Tren de Aragua is made by and designed to be a criminal organization by the Chavez organization, by the Chavez regime, passed on to Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello and everybody else. So when we talk about the Tren de Aragua, we're specifically talking about a criminal organization, just like the Cartel de los Soles, who can trace its chain of command directly to the Venezuelan criminal regime, Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of self-identified analysts that know and understand the Tren de Aragua, but the truth of the matter is that there's not that many people that in the U.S. have that experience. Most of agents and analysts that have worked criminal organizations like gangs have gotten their experience right here in the U.S. or Mexico or Central America, but I can tell you that most U.S. federal agencies have not and do not maintain a direct relationship with the criminal Maduro regime in Venezuela. So therefore, any collaboration between U.S. law enforcement and analysts with the Venezuelan government to try to ascertain or gather facts and details about members and operations of the Tren de Aragua is not there. Most people in the U.S., agents and analysts who are getting that information secondhand, most likely from Colombian government, law enforcement, and intelligence agencies. So, speaking from a position of experience and understanding, my partner, William Acosta, who is a retired NYPD officer and owns his own security company that provides services internationally to many high-ranking companies, we both have experience having been in Venezuela that amounts to more than 35 years or so. So our experience shows by the amount of stamps and about the experiences of having been in Latin America, South America, and in Venezuela. Now, we don't know everything there is about all of these criminal organizations, about the regime in Venezuela, because the environment and the dynamics of the Venezuelan government changes. It fluctuates. It's got highs and lows, and it depends on the circumstances that it's ongoing during that time frame, that it may or may not have an effect on the behavior of these criminal organizations. But right now, we have seen the Colombian government, law enforcement agencies, and the national police and its intelligence apparatus conduct operations inside of Colombia, most recently in Cali, that led to the apprehension of the highest ranking members of the Tren de Aragua who have been apprehended in recent months. So we're talking about the second and third ranking members of the Tren de Aragua who have been apprehended in Colombia. And we have to applaud that, but we will be talking about some of the aspects about what it means to have apprehended those individuals. So in the U.S., we're watching how U.S. law enforcement agencies, local, state law enforcement, is having to work on crime-related gang issues, and we have seen some of the Tren de Aragua relationships show up like, for example, in Texas, in Florida, in New York. And we normally relate those people having come across the border on the open borders policy by the Biden agonizing administration. Most recently and most troubling is the criminal activity allegedly perpetrated by members of the Tren de Aragua in Aurora, Colorado, where criminals have taken over an apartment complex. We've seen where these individuals come in groups of 5, 10, 15 people, and they'll break into somebody's apartment. And we are seeing them seeding and terrorizing the local people and the people that live on those apartment complexes. We have seen how the local law enforcement are having to spend resources over and over again, having to attend the calls made by people who are worried and concerned about the crimes that are being perpetrated by these alleged members of the Tren de Aragua. So remember, there is no local database in the U.S. that we can say with certainty, this is a member of the Tren de Aragua. We have to take the word from a previous investigation, a previous collaboration, probably and most likely coming from overseas, coming from Colombia. That normally is how it starts. So we know that that is the case because we saw what happened a couple of years ago with the failed Operation Gideon, where American former Special Forces military personnel were involved in plotting a coup and taking down the Nicolás Maduro's regime. And all of the planning, all of the organization of Operation Gideon, for the most part, took place in Colombia with the knowledge and understanding of Colombian members, law enforcement, intelligence that knew that this operation planning was being planned in Colombia, and Diosdado Cabello was able to later tell the story that they were infiltrated by Venezuelan intelligence, and now we know with the indictment of these individuals in the U.S. having to go and prove their innocence, now we know that they were in fact involved, taking guns and planning and being operationally driven to conduct Operation Gideon with the objective of removing Nicolás Maduro and the Maduro's regime from power. Why do I talk about Operation Gideon and I talk about the indictment about this former army individuals that were involved in Operation Gideon? Well, simply because Nicolás Maduro has alleged that the U.S. is planning to oust him. And we know from open sources from the media that Eric Prince has been involved in the mix, and that sooner or later, by January, Nicolás Maduro and the regime are going to be removed from power. So that remains to be seen. But we're still talking about what the Tren de Aragua means to the U.S. And so we're seeing allegedly crime perpetrated by members of the Tren de Aragua in many of the states in the U.S. Now, as we get closer to 20 January, and that is an important chronological date because that's the assumption and the inauguration of President Trump on his second presidency, and he has openly discussed what the Tren de Aragua means to the U.S. and what his objective will be. And his objective, he's said it several times, he's going to be removing the Tren de Aragua's threat from the U.S. and returning them to Venezuela. So if we don't have any relationship with Venezuela, so the question is how we're going to get him back, what kind of investigations are being conducted. But the fact of the matter is that there is already a platform where, upon identifying members of the Tren de Aragua in the U.S. committing crimes in the U.S., they're going to be subject to current law, where they're going to go through the judicial process, face justice. If they have to spend time in jail in the U.S., they are most likely going to do that, and then they're going to be extradited to Venezuela. But what we want to discuss is, why is it that in recent months, Colombian law enforcement has been working so hard to identify high-ranking members of the Tren de Aragua operating in Colombia and acting on intelligence from Venezuela that leads to their apprehension and then to their extradition to Venezuela? So this is kind of a little complex. So the Colombians are, quote, concerned and worried about Tren de Aragua high-ranking members operating in Colombia. The Venezuelans provide them with the due intelligence to conduct planning operation that leads to their apprehension, only for them to be extradited to Venezuela under the people that they actually work for. We recently watched Diosdado Cabello, the Minister of Justice and Peace, discuss the relationship of the Tren de Aragua with the recent several apprehensions of foreign individuals who include Americans, Czech, Spaniards, Peruvians, and Bolivians that are planning a coup against Venezuela. So he came out and he briefed on a TV show or a TV press release where he specifically identified a Colombian national who was apprehended entering Venezuela on the border, was apprehended, was taken to Caracas, and then it was alleged that he was one of the main coordinators in recruiting people to participate in this group, to participate in a coup to take down the government of Venezuela. So this guy is allegedly the main guy who is involved with the Tren de Aragua, who is involved with purchasing and getting weapons to arm this group of people who are going to take down the Venezuelan government. So the Venezuelan regime has concocted this conspiracy that all of these foreign nationals are involved in the planning operations of a future coup to get rid of the Maduro's regime. Now the question is it far-fetched? Is it real? Or what is it? Well, we don't have to look that far. There may be some aspects that are real. There may be some other areas that are not. So at this point, we would be purely estimating and talking about things that we really don't have enough details to make those analytical calls. But the truth is that by the regime having all of this foreign national, it does make for great press so that the world sees that somehow the U.S. is behind these foreign nationals, including the 5 or 6 American nationals, including one Navy SEAL who is in Venezuela. And now we have an Argentinian who is a gendarmerie who was also apprehended in the last couple of days, allegedly that he is also involved in the planning operations for this coup. It makes for great TV, it makes for great media, but we really don't think that that is actually the case. So what we're really talking about, is it real, is it true that members of the Tren de Aragua are in Colombia buying and getting weapons for an unknown opposition to get all of those weapons to be involved in a future coup operation to take down the Venezuelan regime, thinking that this is probably one of those operations that Eric Prince is involved. The truth is, we don't know. But what we can tell you is Colombia is taking down these members of the Tren de Aragua that we really don't know and have enough insight to be able to tell what's going on inside of Petro's cabinet and in Petro's inner circle. But remember, Petro alleges that he is not real close to Maduro, but we actually know that they've been planning and they've been having secret negotiations after the failed negotiations led by Brian Nicholson and Juan Sebastian Gonzalez, the former director of the NSC for Western Hemisphere, who conducted one of the worst negotiations in history that led to the handing of the Venezuelan elections to Nicolás Maduro, and turned their back on Maria Corina Machado, and we ended up negotiating an exchange of Alex Saab, the main architect behind getting around U.S. sanctions. And so here we are now in December, 1 year later, almost exactly after Alex Saab was exchanged in a prisoner exchange negotiated deal between the Biden administration and the Nicolás Maduro's regime. Remember, the U.S. government was conducted secret negotiations with a criminal regime in Venezuela for more than 2.5 years. We have seen other members of El Tren de Aragua, members known to be directly related to the Tren de Aragua, who came out of the Tocorón jail in Venezuela, who ended up in Chile and in Peru. We've seen members of the Tren de Aragua being detained, apprehended in those countries as well. So we're seeing real known hardcore members of the Tren de Aragua being apprehended in Colombia, in Chile, in Peru, and in some of the other places that will eventually all be sent back to Venezuela to the same organization heads that they work for. So, in conclusion, if we're living in the U.S. in an open society and we want to enjoy our freedoms, obviously El Tren de Aragua and their criminals represent a threat to our societies, and most definitely they need to be apprehended and run through the judicial process and having to pay in jail if they have to, or extradited back to their countries. We don't want or need any of those people here. But at the same time, we're creating a hysteria of that Venezuelans are members of the Tren de Aragua. And the fact is that they're not. But we need to get rid of them. We need to secure our borders. We need to deal with the Venezuelan regime head on, because they're the head top criminal organization running a state in Latin America that needs to be dealt with and needs to be addressed. Because from the Venezuelan regime, we're watching and seeing running illegal black market oil. We're seeing them running and probably one of the top transshipment drug countries on the world in Latin America. So we know that they're sending cocaine every single day from Venezuela's Apure to Suriname and Guyana. We have seen maritime shipments going to Mexico, going to Central America, going to the Caribbean. The Venezuelan criminal regime headed by Nicolás Maduro and Diosdado Cabello represents a direct threat to U.S. national security, and the Trump administration hopefully is going to take the right steps to address the criminal organization and most possibly for change in Venezuela's government for good, for freedom, and for justice.